A homeless woman is falsely accused of stealing milk for her daughter. A millionaire witnesses the scene and takes an action that moves everyone. The cold wind of a harsh Chicago winter swept through the streets, biting at the exposed skin of passers-by. Amid the towering buildings and crowded sidewalks, Sarah, a young mother, clutched her worn coat tightly around her as she navigated the icy paths with her 4-year-old daughter, Emma. Their reality was one of constant struggle. Homeless and, with nowhere to turn, they spent their days wandering the bustling streets, searching for kindness in the form of spare change or discarded food. Sarah's biggest fear was not the cold or even the humiliation she faced daily, but the haunting thought of Emma going to bed hungry or freezing. The nights were the worst, huddled together on a park bench or in a dimly lit alley, with nothing but thin blankets and each other for warmth. Emma, despite her tender age, rarely complained. Instead, she clung to her mother with wide, trusting eyes, unaware of the depth of their predicament. Every morning, Sarah would gather whatever courage remained in her heart and step out to face the indifference of the city. She wasn't always homeless. Once she had a modest apartment and a steady job as a cashier, but after a series of misfortunes, health issues and job loss, everything crumbled. Now, her life was reduced to surviving day by day. Sarah's routine was to frequent the busiest parts of Chicago, hoping to find enough generosity to buy a small meal. She avoided shelters whenever possible, fearing the dangers she had heard about, and preferring to keep Emma as close as possible. Each coin dropped in her small, battered cup felt like a temporary lifeline, but it was never enough. Emma, bundled in mismatched clothes Sarah had found or received from kind strangers, always walked beside her mother, holding tightly to her hand. The little girl's innocent chatter and occasional laughter were bittersweet reminders of what childhood should be, carefree and safe. Sarah fought every day to protect that spark in her daughter's eyes, despite the cruel reality surrounding them. As winter deepened, so did Sarah's worries. Emma had been coughing more frequently, and Sarah knew that without proper nutrition and warmth, her daughter's health could deteriorate quickly. That morning, as they sat on the corner of a busy street, Sarah felt the crushing weight of helplessness more than ever. She looked at Emma's fragile frame and knew she had to do something, anything to keep her child safe. And so, as the wind howled around them and the world passed by without a second glance, Sarah made a silent promise to Emma. No matter the cost, she would find a way to protect her. The morning was colder than usual, with thick grey clouds hanging low, promising snow before nightfall. Sarah's fingers were numb, even under the thin gloves she had scavenged from a donation box weeks ago. Emma walked beside her, shivering. Quietly, her little hands hidden deep inside her mother's coat as they moved through the crowded streets. They had barely eaten since the day before, surviving only on a few pieces of bread that a passerby had given them. The child's weak cough echoed like a cruel reminder of their urgent need for proper food and warmth. Sarah's heart raced as she stared through the glass window of a small neighborhood supermarket. She knew this store well. It wasn't one of the large, impersonal chains, but a small family-owned place. The warm yellow glow from inside and the shelves stocked with food looked almost surreal compared to the biting cold and empty streets. More than anything, Sarah's eyes focused on the milk aisle. A single box of milk could make the difference between Emma surviving another freezing night or succumbing to the cold and hunger. Pushing open the door, she entered the supermarket with Emma tightly in tow. The warmth inside was almost overwhelming, and for a brief second, Sarah felt like they were just like any other mother and daughter out shopping. But the feeling quickly faded as she noticed the wary glances from a few customers and the store's security guard, who stood near the entrance with arms crossed, eyeing them suspiciously. Sarah was used to these looks, but today, with Emma coughing and visibly weak, it stung more than usual. As they walked through the aisles, Sarah's desperation grew. She had less than $2 in her pocket, not nearly enough to buy milk or anything substantial. Emma tugged at her sleeve, pointing at the colorful cereal boxes, her eyes full of innocent longing. Sarah managed a weak smile and shook her head, signaling that they couldn't afford it. Emma didn't protest, only lowered her gaze, silently accepting the harsh reality. Sarah glanced nervously at the milk section again. She knew she couldn't steal. She had never done it before and swore to herself she never would. But as Emma coughed again, this time more forcefully, Sarah's resolve weakened. She approached the section, standing there for several minutes, pretending to read labels, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice their plight and offer help. But everyone was too busy with their own lives to care. Resisting the urge to slip the milk into her coat, Sarah turned away, defeated. She couldn't do it. She couldn't risk getting caught and leaving Emma alone in the world. As they headed for the exit, the security guard stepped directly into their path. His expression was a mix of suspicion and arrogance. Without a word, he motioned for them to stop. "I need you to open your bag," he said coldly, ignoring Emma's frightened grip on her mother's arm. Sarah's heart sank. "We didn't take anything," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The security guard was unmoved. "Open it," he demanded. The small crowd of customers nearby turned their heads, attracted by the tension. Sarah, flushed with shame, slowly opened her worn bag, revealing nothing but a small cloth with Emma's only change of clothes and a crumpled, empty paper cup. There was no milk, no food, nothing that could remotely be considered stolen. "Empty your coat pockets," the guard continued, unfazed. Sarah complied, turning them inside out, showing that they were also empty. Emma's eyes were wide with fear, her tiny body pressed tightly against her mother's side. Whispers started to rise among the customers, some clearly uncomfortable, others openly judging. Still the guard persisted. "I saw you acting suspiciously near the milk aisle," he accused. Sarah tried to remain calm despite the humiliation burning inside her. "I didn't take anything. Please, we just needed to warm up for a moment." The man's voice grew louder, enough for everyone to hear. "Or maybe you were just planning to steal and got scared. People like you always come back," he said, glaring at Sarah with disgust. The implication cut deep. Sarah felt the stares of strangers pierce through her like icy daggers. Emma, too young to fully grasp the situation but old enough to sense. The danger began to cry softly. Sarah instinctively pulled her closer, trying to shield her from the humiliation. By now, the supermarket had turned into a stage. Customers watched intently, some whispering to each other, while others simply stood in silent judgment. The security guard didn't back down, determined to make an example of Sarah despite having no evidence. "I didn't steal anything," Sarah repeated, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Please, just let us go." But the guard, intoxicated by his authority, continued. "Maybe you hid it somewhere. I should call the police," he threatened. The mention of the police sent a jolt of fear through Sarah. She knew how the system worked. They wouldn't care about the truth. They would see a homeless woman with a child and assume the worst. She imagined Emma being taken away, placed in a foster home, scared and alone. The very thought made her knees weak. Sarah's desperation was visible. Her face, flushed and streaked with tears, pleaded silently for mercy. Emma sobbed into her mother's coat, her small frame trembling. And yet no one moved to help. No one stepped forward to stop the scene. People just watched, some with pity, others with judgment, but all silent. At that very moment, standing by the entrance, observing everything with a distant but intrigued gaze, was Benjamin Carter. Dressed in a tailored coat and leather gloves, Benjamin was a figure of quiet authority. The multimillionaire had entered the store moments earlier, unnoticed amidst the commotion. He was known throughout Chicago as a shrewd businessman, a man of success, but one who rarely involved himself in the affairs of strangers. Benjamin watched the unfolding scene carefully. His sharp eyes missed nothing. The way Sarah shielded Emma, the visible fear and desperation, the unnecessary cruelty of the security guard, and the apathetic faces of the customers. Something about the situation stirred an uncomfortable feeling inside him, one he hadn't experienced in a long time. But for now he remained silent, merely watching. Benjamin Carter stood still by the entrance of the supermarket, watching the scene unfold with an intensity that went unnoticed by those around him. The cold winter air still clung to his tailored coat, as if reluctant to release him into the warmth of the store. He was a man whose name carried weight in Chicago, a titan in the world of real estate and finance, a person accustomed to boardrooms, negotiations, and contracts worth millions. Yet here he was, standing among ordinary people, witnessing a confrontation that had nothing to do with stocks, buildings, or profit margins. His instincts told him to continue with his day. He had come for a simple task, to purchase a bottle of wine for a dinner meeting later that evening. He could have easily turned away, dismissing what was happening as an unfortunate but common occurrence. After all, scenes like these were far from rare in a city where the line between prosperity and poverty was as sharp as a razor's edge. However, something rooted Benjamin to the spot. It wasn't just the image of a homeless woman accused of theft. It was the rawness of the child clinging to her, eyes wide with fear, tears streaking her pale cheeks. That image ignited an old memory in Benjamin, something buried beneath years of corporate ambition and emotional distance. He observed Sarah carefully. He noticed the tremor in her voice, the exhaustion in her posture, and the desperation behind her attempts to protect her daughter from humiliation. Benjamin, who had mastered reading people during his rise to power, could see clearly that this woman wasn't a thief. She was a mother cornered by circumstances beyond her control, trying to preserve the last shreds of dignity she had left. Yet despite the obviousness of her situation, no one came to her defense. The customers remained passive observers. Some averted their gazes, uncomfortable with the unfolding injustice, while others whispered among themselves, their judgmental expressions betraying their indifference. The security guard, emboldened by the silence, continued to berate Sarah, acting more like a prosecutor delivering a verdict than someone ensuring the safety of the store. Benjamin's sharp eyes flicked over the scene. He noticed how Emma's small body was pressed tightly against her mother, how the child's sobs were muffled against the worn fabric of Sarah's coat. He saw the weariness etched into Sarah's features, the sunken eyes, the dry lips, the faint but unmistakable signs of hunger and sleepless nights. This wasn't a woman planning a crime. This was a mother on the brink. A part of Benjamin, the part shaped by years of business dealings and self-preservation, told him to remain a passive witness, to mind his own business and walk away. But another part, older, more human, whispered otherwise. It reminded him of nights from his own past, not so different from the child's cold and frightened expression staring up at him from the crowd. He too had known hardship once, though the world had long since forgotten. As he stood silently, unnoticed by most, Benjamin weighed his options. He was not impulsive. He never acted without thinking. Yet there was an unmistakable pull he couldn't ignore, a sense of injustice that unsettled him in ways he hadn't felt in years. He could have spoken then and there, intervened directly, but instead, he chose to continue watching for a moment longer. Benjamin also noted the reactions of those around him. A young couple whispered, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. An older woman clutched her purse a little tighter, her expression hardening as if Sarah's mere presence confirmed her worst assumptions. A teenager recorded the scene on his phone, more interested in the potential for viral content than the human suffering in front of him. Benjamin felt a wave of disgust, not just at the guard, but at the apathy that surrounded the entire situation. His gaze returned to Sarah, who now knelt beside Emma, whispering comforting words while the security guard loomed above them, unsympathetic and unrelenting. The milk, still on the shelf, had never been touched. It was obvious to anyone willing to look past their prejudices that Sarah had not stolen anything. But logic had little place here. The scene had already turned into a public spectacle, fueled by assumption and fueled even more by fear and ignorance. Benjamin took a step forward, not yet speaking, but closing the distance. He was close enough now to hear Sarah's trembling breaths, to see the security guard's self-satisfied smirk as he brandished his authority. Benjamin's presence did not go unnoticed. The guard shot him a quick glance, recognizing him immediately. The sudden awareness of Benjamin Carter's identity made the man straighten his posture, suddenly less sure of himself, but still unwilling to back down. Benjamin did not speak. He merely continued to observe. His silence, paired with his imposing presence, began to unsettle the guard more than the crowd's murmurs ever could. Some customers recognized Benjamin as well. exchanging surprised glances. What was a billionaire doing here, watching this unfold like everyone else? Whispers of his name began to spread, but Benjamin ignored them, his focus solely on Sarah and Emma. Sarah finally noticed him too. Her tear-streaked face lifted for a brief second, meeting Benjamin's eyes. In that fleeting moment, he saw not just desperation, but pride. She was humiliated, scared, and cold, but she refused to beg. She refused to let the crowd see her broken. The connection struck Benjamin deeper than he expected. He knew that look. He had worn it himself once years ago when the world had seemed just as indifferent. Benjamin's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. The scene was no longer just a misunderstanding in a small supermarket. It was a reflection of a society quick to judge and slow to help. His instincts as a businessman told him to stay detached, but his conscience, buried under layers of ambition and success, refused to remain silent. He remained still, for now, but his mind was already made up. This situation would not end as the security guard or the apathetic crowd expected. Benjamin Carter was about to act, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the confines of this modest store. The tension inside the supermarket thickened like fog, stifling and oppressive. Sarah, still crouched beside Emma, fought to steady her breathing. The glances from every corner of the store bore down on her like invisible weights. It wasn't just the security guard towering over her. It was the collective judgment of every pair of eyes fixed upon them. She could feel their unspoken accusations, their quiet assumptions filling the air. Emma whimpered softly, burying her face deeper into her mother's worn coat, desperately seeking a shield from the cold, from the fear, and from the piercing stares of strangers who seemed to have already passed their verdict. The security guard, emboldened by the silence of the crowd and the apparent absence of resistance, took a deliberate step closer. His boots thudded heavily against the tile floor, making Sarah instinctively recoil. "Stand up," he commanded, with a cold detachment, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience, a disruption to his routine. Sarah obeyed, slowly rising to her feet, clutching Emma's hand tightly. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, trying to mask the storm inside. With methodical cruelty, the guard gestured for Sarah to extend her arms and subjected her to a public search. He patted down the threadbare layers of her coat, checked her pockets again, and inspected the worn-out bag slung over her shoulder, pulling out the meager contents one by one for everyone to see. There was nothing, just the child's clothes, a small blanket, and a crumpled receipt from a previous day. Nothing remotely close to a stolen item. Yet, the act itself was enough to strip Sarah of the last remnants of dignity she tried so hard to hold on to. Emma sobbed openly now, her small fingers trembling as she tried to hide her face. The scene unfolding before her was too much for a child who barely understood why her mother, the person she trusted most, was being treated this way. Sarah's own tears threatened to fall, but she bit the inside of her cheek to stop them. Showing weakness in front of these people felt unbearable. The guard, finding nothing, stepped back but did not apologize. Instead, he looked Sarah up and down with contempt. "You got lucky this time," he sneered, as if somehow the absence of stolen goods did not absolve her of guilt. His voice carried across the store, amplified by the silence around them, reaching every corner and ear. The words weren't meant as a warning. They were meant to humiliate, to remind Sarah of her place, in his eyes, beneath even the dirt on the floor. Murmurs spread among the customers, some expressing sympathy, others nodding in agreement with the guard, convinced that where there was smoke, there must be fire. The few who looked uncomfortable did nothing. No one stepped forward. No one interrupted. The collective inertia of the crowd allowed the injustice to deepen without challenge. The security guard crossed his arms, satisfied, while Sarah stood frozen, trembling but refusing to let the tears fall. Through the blur of shame, Sarah noticed Emma's little fingers tightening around hers. The child was scared, but more than that, she was confused. In her innocent mind, her mother was the strongest person she knew, yet here was a world that treated her as less than human. Sarah wanted to reassure her, to say that everything would be all right, but the words stuck in her throat, choked by the reality that she couldn't promise safety or justice. Benjamin Carter, still standing silently nearby, felt his stomach twist in a way he hadn't experienced since his youth. Every second that passed ignited a fury within him, but he remained composed, observing the layers of cruelty unfold with clinical precision. He saw beyond the surface. He saw a mother forced to withstand humiliation for the sake of her child, a child forced to watch helplessly as the person she trusted most was treated like a criminal. The security guard, emboldened by the continued passivity of the customers, decided to deliver one final blow. "We've got cameras everywhere. Don't bother trying next time. People like you always end up back here," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. The insinuation was clear. Sarah was marked. In his eyes, she wasn't just a desperate mother. She was a repeat offender, someone to be watched and suspected endlessly. At that, a few customers actually chuckled, shaking their heads. Others averted their eyes, ashamed, but still did nothing. Sarah's knees buckled slightly, but she steadied herself, refusing to collapse. She pulled Emma closer, shielding the child as best as she could, even though she herself felt exposed and raw. Benjamin's jaw tightened. His eyes shifted briefly toward the store manager, who stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching the ordeal like a casual observer rather than someone in authority. No one had intervened. No one had offered a hand. It wasn't just about the security guard anymore. It was about an entire room of people who allowed the humiliation of a mother and child to play out for their own discomfort or entertainment. Sarah, sensing that the situation was not going to improve, gently tugged Emma's hand, attempting to leave. But the security guard blocked her path one last time, raising his hand in a stopping gesture. "You'll wait here until the police arrive," he said, though he hadn't yet made a call. He wanted her to squirm, to feel the weight of his authority. The cruelty was deliberate. Emma began crying uncontrollably, her sobs echoing throughout the store. The sound seemed to pierce the hardened shells of some customers who shifted uncomfortably, but still remained silent. Sarah, trembling with rage and fear, forced herself to meet the guard's gaze. "Please, we didn't take anything. Let us go," she whispered, her voice breaking. The guard stood firm. "Not until the police get here," he said flatly, indifferent to the scene of a child in distress and a mother on the verge of collapse. Benjamin, watching from just a few feet away, clenched his fists inside his leather gloves. The scene had crossed a line. It wasn't just about principle anymore. It was about humanity. He stepped forward, finally breaking the barrier between himself and the injustice unfolding before him. But he didn't speak yet. Not until he was standing, right beside Sarah and Emma, close enough that both of them noticed his presence. Sarah's head turned slightly, and for a brief second their eyes met again. Benjamin saw the pleading, the exhaustion, and the pride warring inside her. And then he saw Emma, whose sobs softened slightly upon noticing the tall man standing nearby. Benjamin Carter was no stranger to power, and as he took his position beside them, the entire energy in the store shifted. The security guard faltered, suddenly realizing the weight of the man standing before him. Customers recognized him too, whispering his name, their expressions transforming from detached to curious, some even to fearful. Yet Benjamin remained silent, surveying the situation with cold calculation. The next move would be his. The air in the supermarket seemed to freeze, heavier than the biting Chicago winter outside. The murmurs among the customers swelled as Benjamin Carter, without haste or hesitation, took another deliberate step forward, his polished shoes echoing softly on the tile floor. His presence, so commanding and unexpected, shifted the dynamics of the room without the need for a single word. The security guard, who until then had been reveling in his authority, visibly stiffened. His eyes darted between Benjamin's face and the now trembling mother and child, unsure if he should maintain his bravado or back down. Benjamin's gaze never left Sarah and Emma. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, scanned the mother's trembling form and the small child clinging to her leg. He saw more than fear. He saw pride, the kind that refused to break even under humiliation. Sarah's eyes, though swollen from tears, held on to that glimmer of defiance, a silent promise to herself and her daughter not to beg, not to yield fully to despair. Benjamin knew that look intimately. It was the same look he had carried during the hardest moments of his life, long before wealth insulated him from such public degradation. He inhaled deeply and finally spoke, his voice steady, clear, and laced with authority. "Is there a problem here?" The simplicity of the question carried weight. The guard blinked, suddenly caught off guard. Benjamin's tone was not that of a curious bystander, but of someone who demanded accountability. Customers leaned closer, trying to catch every word. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. "Just handling a situation, Mr. Carter," he stammered, instantly recognizing the man whose face had graced countless magazines and news articles. I suspected theft." Benjamin's eyebrows arched subtly. "Suspected," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He then turned his gaze to Sarah, softening it slightly. "Madam, did you take anything from this store?" Sarah, overwhelmed by the sudden shift and the directness of Benjamin's approach, found herself speechless for a moment. Emma's sobs had softened to quiet sniffles, watching the scene with wide, confused eyes. Sarah swallowed hard and shook her head. "No, sir," she whispered. "We didn't take anything. We were just trying to warm up." Benjamin nodded slowly, as if he had known the answer all along. His attention returned to the security guard. "Did you find anything during your thorough inspection?" His voice carried a thinly veiled sarcasm. The guard hesitated. "No, sir, but she was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" Benjamin interrupted calmly, but firmly. "Suspicious because she's homeless? Because she has a child who's visibly cold and hungry?" The words, delivered without raising his voice, sliced through the room like a knife. The crowd went silent, some shifting awkwardly, realizing the implications. Benjamin took another step, standing now directly between Sarah and the guard. His stature was imposing, but there was something even more intimidating in his composed demeanor. "Do you often publicly humiliate customers based solely on suspicion without evidence?" he asked. The guard's face turned pale. He fumbled for a response but found none. His authority, so confidently displayed moments ago, crumbled under the weight of Benjamin's presence. Benjamin turned slightly, directing his words to the manager, who had remained a passive observer until now. "Is this how you run your business?" His voice was quieter, but the question was damning. The manager, realizing the precarious position he was in, stepped forward nervously. No, Mr. Carter, of course not. We deeply apologize for this." "Misunderstanding," the manager said, glancing anxiously at the onlookers who were now filming or whispering with increased intensity. Benjamin's eyes narrowed. He could have stopped there, satisfied with forcing an apology. But as he glanced once more at Sarah and Emma, he knew it wasn't enough. An apology could not erase the trauma inflicted, nor could it feed a child or protect a mother through another freezing night. Instead of addressing the manager further, Benjamin shifted his attention fully to Sarah. He took a careful step closer, ensuring his body language was open, non-threatening. He lowered his voice, but it carried through the room, commanding attention. "Ma'am," he said softly, "did you come here today because you needed something for your daughter?" Sarah hesitated. Admitting the truth, especially in front of strangers, felt like surrendering. But looking into Benjamin's eyes, she saw no judgment, only genuine concern. She nodded slightly, biting her lip to hold back fresh tears. "We needed milk," she murmured, the words barely audible. Benjamin nodded again, slowly. His expression did not change. It remained composed, compassionate, and focused. He then turned without another word and walked towards the nearest register. The cashier, clearly startled, watched as Benjamin began collecting not just a carton of milk, but an entire assortment of groceries, basic necessities, warm food, fruits, and even a few small items likely meant to bring a smile to a child's face. The customers watched in silence, some with shame, others with curiosity. The store had never felt so tense nor so unified in attention. Benjamin returned, arms full of groceries, and placed them gently at Sarah's feet. "This," he said, looking directly into Sarah's eyes, "is not charity. It's humanity." His voice remained calm but carried undeniable resolve. No one should have to beg for basic dignity. Sarah's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but the words were lost amid the flood of emotions. Emma, still clutching her mother's coat, looked up at the man with wide, tear-filled eyes. The entire store stood still, paralyzed by the gravity of the moment. Benjamin didn't stop there. He addressed the entire store. "If any of you," he said, looking around, "ever find yourselves too busy or too comfortable to help someone in need, remember today. And remember how easy it is to be kind." Silence. No one spoke. Some lowered their heads, others wiped tears from their eyes. The security guard stepped back, now fully aware of the magnitude of his mistake, while the manager looked as though he wished he could disappear. Benjamin then faced Sarah again. His voice softened. "May I walk you out?" he offered. Sarah, overwhelmed and trembling, could only nod. Benjamin extended a hand, which Emma instinctively reached for before Sarah gently guided her closer. Together, they walked past the frozen crowd, stepping into the cold Chicago air, but somehow the winter seemed less biting than before. Benjamin knew he had only just started to intervene. He could have ended it there, with a few groceries and a fleeting gesture. But deep down he knew this wasn't the end of their encounter. Something had stirred in him, a resolve that went beyond guilt or sympathy. As they disappeared from the eyes of the watching crowd, Benjamin's mind was already contemplating the next step, one that would change all of their lives. As Sarah and Benjamin stepped into the open air, the cold wind brushed against their faces with less sharpness than before, yet the weight of humiliation clung heavily to Sarah's shoulders. Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly, eyes still red from crying. Benjamin walked beside them, measured and silent, allowing Sarah the space to regain her composure. He noticed the subtle trembling in her fingers, the slight stagger in her step, not from the chill alone but from the emotional strain of what she had just endured. The streets were still busy with pedestrians wrapped in thick coats, unaware or indifferent to the quiet drama that had unfolded inside the supermarket. Yet behind them, within the store, murmurs continued, a mixture of curiosity, guilt, and skepticism. Not everyone watching had felt sympathy. Some regarded Sarah with deep-seated prejudice, convinced that appearances were enough proof of guilt. Whispers persisted, speculating whether Benjamin had been naive or manipulated. Among the customers inside, a man leaned against a counter, speaking to another with a mocking tone. "He fell for the act," he said, shaking his head. "They're professionals at this kind of thing. Sympathy is their greatest weapon." His companion nodded, watching through the window as Sarah, Benjamin, and Emma walked away. "Just another scam," he agreed. The words, though softly spoken, were soaked in conviction. They didn't see a mother fighting for her child. They saw only the worn coat, the unkempt hair, the poverty. That was enough for them to judge. Even on the street, as Sarah and Benjamin walked a few blocks away from the supermarket, Sarah noticed sidelong glances from strangers. Some recognized Benjamin and instinctively assumed she must have been someone he was helping out of obligation or pity. Others, less discreet, openly scrutinized her and Emma as if searching for signs confirming whatever narrative they had constructed. The streets might have been vast, but Sarah felt as trapped and scrutinized out here as she had inside. Benjamin noticed too. He was not blind to the stares or the quiet judgment in the eyes of passers-by. He was familiar with how the world measured worth based on appearance and status. Yet, this time, witnessing it happen to someone who clearly did not deserve such scorn awakened a dormant anger in him. As a businessman, he had learned to ignore public perception when necessary, but as a man witnessing such raw injustice, he could not remain indifferent. Sarah, however, was used to this. The cruel glances, the whispered words she wasn't meant to hear, the tightening of purses and backpacks when she walked by. All of it had become part of her daily existence. But this time, with Benjamin walking beside her, it stung deeper. She could almost hear the silent accusations. Why is a man like him helping her? What did she do to earn this? The sheer presence of someone like Benjamin seemed to confirm, for the onlookers that Sarah was somehow manipulating the situation. Still walking in silence, Benjamin led them toward a small cafe, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. He stopped at the door and turned to Sarah. "Please," he said, gesturing toward the door, "allow me to offer you and your daughter a warm meal." Sarah hesitated, torn between gratitude and suspicion. After what just happened, the last thing she wanted was to appear dependent or opportunistic in front of yet another audience. But Emma's trembling and pale face broke any resolve to refuse. Sarah nodded softly, accepting the offer. Inside, the cafe was cozy, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. The warmth was immediate, seeping into Sarah and Emma's bones, but it did little to ease the growing discomfort Sarah felt. She could feel eyes on her, not just from the staff, but from patrons seated nearby. Some recognized Benjamin immediately, their curiosity evident. Whispers started again, this time accompanied by discreet glances at the trio. The contrast between Benjamin's expensive coat and Sarah's worn clothes was impossible to ignore. As they sat at a small corner table, Benjamin ordered food without hesitation. Soup, sandwiches, hot cocoa for Emma. Sarah sat stiffly, her eyes darting around the room, anticipating more judgment. Emma, however, slowly relaxed, wrapping her small hands around the warm cup of cocoa as if it were the greatest treasure she had ever held. Benjamin leaned forward, speaking quietly. "I noticed how they looked at you in there," he said, his tone low but deliberate. "I'm sorry for that, no one deserves it." Sarah avoided his gaze, staring instead at Emma. "It's not the first time," she replied, voice steady but heavy. "It's just part of the day now." Benjamin remained silent for a moment, digesting her words. He realized that while today's incident felt outrageous to him, for Sarah, it was merely another page in a long, tragic routine. The resilience she showed wasn't born of choice, but necessity. She had learned to endure the scrutiny, the unfairness, the constant weight of public assumption without complaint. Around them, conversations resumed, but the occasional glance reminded Sarah that curiosity and judgment followed her even here. She hated the feeling, the way people looked at her as if she were nothing more than a spectacle. Worse still, she feared that Benjamin, despite his kindness, might also eventually see her through that same lens, as someone to pity, someone broken. Yet, Benjamin's expression remained unchanged. He observed, but not like the others. His eyes did not carry the emptiness of judgment, but the depth of understanding. He was beginning to grasp the layers of Sarah's reality, the harshness that went beyond hunger and cold. It was the silent war against perception, the daily battle against a world eager to dehumanize. Emma, unaware of the complexities around her, simply smiled faintly, grateful for the warmth and the food. Her innocence, though battered, had not yet been completely stolen by the world. Benjamin noticed the small spark and realized how close it was to being extinguished if things continued as they were. Sarah remained guarded, unsure of Benjamin's true intentions. She had seen people offer help before, only to expect something in return or withdraw it the moment it became inconvenient. She was painfully aware of the transactional nature of kindness in a world that rarely gave without taking. But Benjamin's demeanor didn't match the patterns she had learned to recognize. He wasn't asking for anything, wasn't parading his generosity. He simply sat there, letting the silence speak more than his words. Outside, the snow began to fall gently, covering the streets in a thin layer of white. Inside the cafe, Sarah and Emma were safe, warm, and for a fleeting moment, allowed to forget the cruelty of the outside world. Yet the lingering glances, the whispered assumptions, and Sarah's own ingrained mistrust clouded what should have been a simple gesture of kindness. Benjamin, watching Sarah struggle silently with the weight of the moment, knew that earning her trust would not be easy. But deep inside, he had already committed to seeing it through, regardless of how uncomfortable it might become. He knew this story wasn't about charity, nor about appearances. It was about dignity, about restoring to a mother and her child something the world had tried to strip away. He just wasn't sure if Sarah would allow herself to accept it. Not yet. The hours seemed to stretch inside the small cafe as Benjamin observed Sarah and Emma from across the table. The simple act of eating a warm meal became a quiet ritual, marked by small gestures rather than words. Emma, now sipping her second cup of cocoa, appeared calmer, her fragile form visibly relaxed. Under the cafe's gentle heat, Sarah, however, remained tense. The initial shock had dulled, but the storm inside her persisted. Her hands, even as they held the spoon, trembled faintly, not from cold, but from the burden of the day, from the weight of a life lived on the fringes where kindness was often indistinguishable from pity. Benjamin watched every detail carefully. He noticed how Sarah would glance toward the door every few minutes, as if expecting someone to burst in and accuse her again. He saw how, even while eating, she always kept Emma close, occasionally brushing a lock of hair from the child's face, or softly whispering words that only a mother would understand. Every small act of care spoke louder than the events of the supermarket. It was a story Benjamin recognized well, though in a different shape. He had once seen the same unspoken fear and instinctual protection in his own mother's eyes during the most precarious years of his youth. As the meal ended, Benjamin could no longer delay the decision brewing inside him. He had wrestled with it silently, measuring the implications as he would any major business choice. But this wasn't about stocks or assets. This was about a child with eyes too heavy for her age and a mother whose pride had been eroded by years of hardship, yet who still stood firm, refusing to beg. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Sarah," he began, for the first time addressing her by name, which he had picked up from the whispers inside the store. "I want to do more than just pay for lunch." His tone was steady, cautious, yet firm. "I have the means to help." "You properly?" Sarah stiffened instantly. The words sounded like a trap. In her world, offers of help often came with hidden strings, with debts disguised as generosity. She stared at Benjamin, unsure if she should trust him or prepare herself for the disappointment she knew too well. Benjamin sensed the change. He knew that trust was something he couldn't simply buy. "I'm not offering charity," he said carefully, "and I'm not here out of guilt. I saw what happened. I saw you. The way you protected your daughter. The way you endured that. Humiliation without breaking." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I want to help because it's the right thing to do, no conditions." Sarah's eyes lowered. The weight of the moment pressed against her. She had taught herself never to trust kindness at face value, because rarely, if ever, was it genuine. But the man in front of her did not look like the others. He wasn't offering a coat and then turning away, nor was he tossing a few bills at her feet as if to clear his conscience. Benjamin continued, "I own several community projects around the city. One of them is in need of staff, not charity positions, real work. Work that pays, that offers stability. I also fund shelters, not just beds, but places where people can be safe, especially families." He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "I can help you and Emma find temporary housing tonight. From there, if you choose, we can arrange something more permanent." Sarah's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. The offer was too big, too generous, too dangerous. What if he was like the others? What if this came with conditions that she couldn't afford to pay? Yet, looking at Emma, sipping cocoa, cheeks flushed from the warmth, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The instinct to protect her daughter was stronger than her fear of disappointment. Still, Sarah hesitated. Benjamin saw it clearly. She wasn't refusing out of pride alone. It was survival instinct, sharpened by betrayal after betrayal. He didn't push further. Instead, he simply said, "Think about it. There's no pressure. I'll leave you my contact information. Whatever you decide, it's your choice." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with possibilities, with the fear of hope, with the cautious flicker of trust beginning to spark. As they prepared to leave, Benjamin handed Sarah a simple business card. No grand gestures, no promises wrapped in flowery words, just a name, a number, and the assurance that she could reach out whenever she was ready. He paid the bill quietly and led them outside where the snow was falling thicker now, covering the sidewalks like a soft, silent curtain. At the edge of the street, Benjamin paused. "I'll arrange for you to stay at a safe place tonight," he said. "No strings attached, just warmth, safety, and rest." Sarah, swallowing hard, gave a small nod. Emma looked up at her mother, and then at Benjamin, her small voice breaking the silence. "Thank you," she whispered shyly. Benjamin smiled, faintly, but it wasn't the smile of someone seeking gratitude. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a human connection formed in the middle of a city that too often forgot its own heart. As he turned to make the arrangements, Benjamin knew this was only the beginning. Helping Sarah and Emma wasn't just about one night's shelter or a single act of kindness. It was about changing the course of their story, about ensuring that neither of them would ever again stand alone, defenseless against the indifferent cold of the world. But whether Sarah would accept it fully was a battle yet to be decided. For now, Benjamin respected the fragile boundary between offering help and forcing it, knowing that sometimes the hardest part of healing is daring to trust again. The car. Ride to the shelter was silent, marked only by the rhythmic hum of the engine and the soft patter of snow against the windows. Sarah sat stiffly. Emma nestled against her side, half asleep. Benjamin sat opposite, watching without pressing, allowing the silence to exist without trying to fill it. For Sarah, every mile away from the supermarket only deepened her internal conflict. She should have felt relieved. The cold night would not be spent on the streets, Emma would sleep in a warm bed, and food would no longer be a question mark, at least for now. Yet, Sarah's mind spun with doubt, suspicion, and fear. Years of hardship had taught her that every gift had a hidden cost. When the car stopped in front of a modest yet well-maintained shelter on the city's outskirts, Sarah hesitated before stepping out. The building, bathed in the soft glow of yellow streetlights, looked almost inviting. But Sarah couldn't ignore the voices in her head, reminding her of broken promises, of people who had extended a helping hand, only to snatch it back at the first inconvenience. Benjamin opened the door but did not urge her. He simply waited. Sarah, after a long pause, stepped out, holding Emma tightly. Inside, the shelter was quiet and warm, filled with the gentle murmur of families settling in for the night. Volunteers moved about calmly, offering blankets, warm meals, and soft words. To many it would have seemed like salvation, but to Sarah it felt like a trap she couldn't yet name. As Benjamin spoke with the staff, Sarah stood awkwardly in a corner, observing everything with suspicion. Emma, however, immediately gravitated toward a small table where a few children were drawing and playing with toys. It was the first time in weeks that Sarah saw her daughter act like a child without fear or hesitation. Emma's laughter, though faint, echoed like a forgotten melody in Sarah's ears. Still, the mother's unease remained firmly rooted. Later that evening, Benjamin returned to check on them. He found Sarah sitting alone on one of the couches in the common area, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the window where snowflakes melted quietly against the glass. Emma was already asleep in one of the shelter's small dormitories. Benjamin approached cautiously. "I hope the room was comfortable," he said gently. Sarah didn't look at him. "Why are you doing this?" The question came out flat, devoid of gratitude or curiosity, just suspicion. Benjamin sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. "Because I can," he replied simply, "and because I should." Sarah scoffed quietly, her eyes still fixed on the window. People don't help without a reason. Benjamin didn't flinch. He knew this reaction well. It was the voice of someone who had seen too much, trusted too often, and been disappointed. Every time. "That may be true," he admitted, "but it doesn't make kindness impossible. It just makes it rare." Sarah's fingers tightened around the edge of her coat. "I don't need pity," she said sharply. Benjamin nodded. "I'm not offering it." Silence settled between them again. Sarah could feel the weight of Benjamin's gaze, but it wasn't intrusive, it was patient. He wasn't there to convince her, he was there to offer. And that distinction, subtle but important, unnerved her more than outright insistence would have. Sarah finally turned to face him. "What do you want from me? I know how this goes. You help, I become a story you tell at your dinner parties, some lesson about generosity, right? You feel better, and I go back to the streets when you get bored." Benjamin's jaw tightened, not from anger but from the truth in her words. He had seen countless people use charity for personal gain, transforming human suffering into anecdotes or tax deductions. But that wasn't why he was here, not this time. "You're not a story," he said quietly. "You're a person. And Emma is a child who deserves better than this. I can't fix the world, but I can do something about this moment." Sarah's defenses faltered for a heartbeat. She could see in Benjamin's eyes that he meant it. There was no arrogance, no self-congratulation, just resolve. Yet that didn't erase the years of wounds she carried. The thought of depending on someone, especially someone as powerful as Benjamin, terrified her more than any cold night ever had. "I've survived without anyone for this long," she said, half to herself, half to him. Benjamin nodded. "Yes, you have. But survival isn't the same as living." His voice softened. "And Emma deserves to live, Sarah, not just survive." The words pierced deeper than Sarah expected. She hated how they made sense, how they reflected the truth she had tried so hard to ignore. Emma wasn't just enduring hunger and cold. She was learning from it. Learning that the world was hostile, that safety was a luxury, that dignity was optional. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek quickly, as if ashamed. Benjamin said nothing, allowing her that space. He stood up and adjusted his coat. "You don't have to trust me now," he said, "but the offer stands. The shelter is yours for as long as you need it. If you want more than that, I'm here." He placed another card on the table beside her and walked away without looking back. Alone again, Sarah stared at the card, then at the window where the snow continued to fall steadily. Emma's soft breathing from the nearby dormitory was the only sound accompanying her. Sarah's heart ached, torn between fear and the painful glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't another cruel joke from life. Yet, as she lay beside Emma later that night, listening to the gentle snoring of other families in the room, Sarah couldn't silence the nagging question in her mind. What if trusting him was a mistake? What if she allowed hope to enter, only to have it ripped away once again? As sleep finally overtook her, Sarah knew that the battle inside her was far from over. The world had taught her to survive, but Benjamin was asking her to believe, and belief, after everything, was the hardest thing of all. The following morning, Sarah woke up disoriented. The warmth of the shelter felt almost foreign, as if she were trespassing in someone else's life. Emma slept soundly beside her, her little chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. For the first time in what felt like years, Sarah had not been woken by the sting of cold or the fear of strangers approaching during the night. Yet this comfort was overshadowed by an overwhelming uncertainty about what came next. She stared at the ceiling, the events of the previous day running through her mind like an unfinished puzzle. Benjamin's offer still lingered, both as a potential salvation and as a looming risk. Later that morning, Sarah found herself sitting in a small community room inside the shelter. Volunteers bustled about, serving breakfast and tending to families, while Emma sat at a nearby table drawing with crayons someone had provided. Sarah sipped a cup of weak coffee, trying to ignore the curious glances from other residents who were already aware that her arrival had been different from the usual. Everyone had noticed Benjamin Carter's appearance the night before. Whispers circulated, some filled with envy, others with skepticism. To Sarah, it only reinforced her fear of being seen as a spectacle, another tragic story that people would soon forget. Her thoughts were interrupted when Benjamin returned to the shelter later that morning, dressed less formally than the day before, but still unmistakably carrying the air of someone who belonged to a different world. He approached quietly, respectful of the unspoken boundaries. Sarah's heart tightened at his presence, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "I thought I might find you here," Benjamin said, his voice calm. Sarah didn't respond immediately. She watched Emma instead, who was lost in the joy of drawing. "You could have called," she replied flatly, though without the sharpness from the night before. Benjamin took the chair across from her, sitting carefully as if aware that the chair itself might protest under his weight. He glanced briefly at Emma. "I didn't want to make this feel like a transaction. I came because I want to understand." Sarah crossed her arms, defensively. "Understand what?" "Your story," Benjamin said without hesitation. "Not out of curiosity, not for pity, because I believe understanding is the first step to doing this right." Sarah almost laughed, but the sound got stuck in her throat. Doing this right, there's no right for people like me. You help today, you forget tomorrow. Benjamin didn't flinch. I don't plan to forget. For a long moment, Sarah studied him. There was no performance, no hollow charm, no traces of the business persona she expected. What she saw instead was a man who genuinely looked like he wanted to listen, not fix, not patronize, just listen. Against her better judgment, Sarah spoke. She told him about the job she once held, working as a receptionist at a small insurance office, about how a sudden illness left her bedridden for months, leading to mounting medical bills that devoured her savings. How she had no family to turn to, no friends able to shoulder the burden. She spoke about the eviction, the slow erosion of stability, and the terrifying moment when she realized she and Emma had nowhere to go but the streets. She didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. She simply laid out the truth, raw and unfiltered. Benjamin listened in silence, never interrupting. His eyes stayed fixed on Sarah, not wandering, not judging. When she finished, Sarah felt strangely lighter, though the weight on her shoulders hadn't lessened. After a brief pause, Benjamin spoke quietly. You didn't deserve any of that. His voice wasn't patronizing, it was heavy with sincerity. I know it doesn't change what happened, but you need to hear it. Sarah blinked away, a sudden sting in her eyes. Hearing those words, spoken without pity, reached deeper than she expected. Benjamin continued. My mother wasn't much older than you when we lost everything. I was about Emma's age. I remember nights like the ones you've endured. Nights where every sound could mean danger, and every sunrise only brought more hunger. His voice softened. I haven't thought about those days for a long time. I buried them beneath years of work, of trying to never go back there. He took a breath. But watching you yesterday, seeing you stand there for your daughter the way my mother did for me, I remembered. Sarah's defenses wavered. This wasn't a man merely playing the hero. This was someone who had lived through shadows of her own story. She found herself unexpectedly leaning forward, searching his eyes for deception and finding none. Benjamin leaned back. This isn't about charity, Sarah. This is about two people who know what it's like to be invisible. The difference is that now I have the means to help, and I intend to. Sarah struggled to process the weight of his words. Her instincts screamed caution, but something deeper, something long buried beneath years of survival, dared to hope. She glanced at Emma, who was now proudly holding up her drawing, a stick figure version of herself and Sarah, standing beneath the sun. Benjamin smiled faintly at the sight, then returned his gaze to Sarah. I'm offering you more than a warm bed for a night. I'm offering you a job, a place to live, and a chance to build again. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you deserve the opportunity. Sarah's voice was barely audible. What if I say no? Benjamin's answer came without hesitation. Then I will still make sure you and Emma have a safe place to stay, for as long as you need. Sarah's throat tightened. This wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a story for him to tell at a charity gala. This was genuine. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt something fragile stir inside her. Trust. Yet, trust was not something she could give easily. It would take more than words and gestures. But as she looked at Emma, radiant even after all they'd endured, Sarah realized that perhaps for her daughter's sake it was worth trying. Benjamin didn't press further. He stood and prepared to leave, but before stepping away, he said, One last thing. The offer is yours, no deadlines. Take the time you need. As he exited the room, Sarah sat motionless, staring at the business card Benjamin had left on the table the night before. Emma rushed back to her side, clutching the drawing. Look, Mommy, it's us, she said with a soft smile. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, feeling the first crack in the fortress she had built around her heart. Maybe, just maybe, the impossible wasn't as far away as she thought. The following days passed like a strange blur for Sarah. She remained at the shelter, watching Emma adapt surprisingly well to the temporary safety. The child, resilient beyond her years, began to play more freely with the other children and sleep soundly through the nights without waking up in fear. Yet Sarah herself remained restless. The warmth of the shelter was temporary, and the scars from her past remained fresh. Despite Benjamin's words, she found herself constantly questioning if this kindness would vanish like every other fleeting promise she had clung to before. Benjamin didn't pressure her. He visited the shelter once, more during those days, not to insist but to maintain the connection. Each visit was brief and gentle, respecting Sarah's space. He observed rather than intervened, knowing that trust, once shattered, could only be rebuilt piece by piece. What he did not expect, however, was how deeply the image of Sarah and Emma had started to imprint on him. He had walked into that supermarket as a detached man, used to numbers and business deals, but he was now caught in something that felt intensely personal, something that transcended obligation. It wasn't until the 5th day, after watching Emma fall asleep peacefully once again, that Sarah made her decision. Quietly, without telling anyone, she called the number Benjamin had given her. She wasn't sure what she would say or what she wanted exactly. She only knew that Emma deserved more than this endless cycle of uncertainty. Benjamin answered personally, his voice calm and patient. Sarah struggled for words, eventually managing a hesitant, "I think I'm ready to talk." What happened next was not what Sarah expected. Instead of arranging a private meeting, Benjamin invited her and Emma to attend a small public event organized by one of his social projects. He explained it was for families in similar situations, nothing extravagant, just a gathering with food, music and activities for children. Sarah, suspicious but curious, accepted. Emma, when informed, could barely contain her excitement. The prospect of a party with other kids was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. The event took place at a community center, decorated modestly but filled with genuine warmth. Families from various backgrounds filled the hall, sharing stories, laughter, and homemade food provided by volunteers. Sarah kept Emma close as they entered, immediately feeling the eyes of a few attendees upon them. Yet, unlike before, there was no judgment in their gazes, only familiarity. These were people who had faced similar hardships, people who recognized the silent language of survival. Benjamin greeted them personally, dressed plainly, blending in with the crowd. He did not present himself as the billionaire philanthropist that the city knew, but as a member of the community. He introduced Sarah and Emma to a few volunteers, careful not to make a spectacle of them. Emma quickly bonded with the other children, her laughter filling the hall as she ran from one game to another. Sarah, watching from a distance, allowed herself to smile for the first time in days. As the afternoon wore on, Benjamin took the stage. The chatter dimmed as all eyes turned to him. Sarah's stomach twisted, fearing for a moment that he might expose her story to everyone. But Benjamin surprised her. "Today," he began, "we are not here to hand out favors. We are here to recognize strength, to celebrate resilience. I've learned that those who endure the most are often the ones who remain unseen. But not today." His eyes briefly found Sarah's in the crowd before returning to address everyone. "Today, we see you." He spoke not of charity, but of dignity, of the untold stories behind each person sitting in that room. He didn't mention Sarah or Emma by name. He didn't single them out. Yet, through every word, Sarah felt as if he were speaking directly to her, acknowledging her without turning her into a symbol. At the end of his speech, Benjamin made an announcement that no one anticipated. He revealed the creation of a new initiative within his foundation, one focused on providing employment, training, and housing for homeless families, particularly single parents. The initiative, he explained, would begin immediately, and those present would be the first to benefit. The room erupted in applause and tearful cheers. Sarah's heart raced. It wasn't just about her anymore. Benjamin was committing to change on a scale far beyond a single gesture. And as Emma ran back to her, pulling her hand excitedly, Sarah realized that this wasn't about saving just one mother and child. It was about restoring dignity to many. As the event came to a close, Benjamin approached Sarah privately. "This is not about obligation," he said softly. "It's about doing the right thing." Sarah, overwhelmed, could only nod. She didn't fully understand why Benjamin had chosen to go so far. But in his eyes, she saw no desire for recognition, no ulterior motive, only a quiet determination to correct, in some small way, the injustices he had witnessed. As she watched Emma play among the children, surrounded by music and laughter, Sarah felt the first fragile threads of hope begin to mend inside her. For the first time in years, the future did not seem like a threat, but like a door slightly ajar, waiting for her to push it open. She wasn't ready to fully believe yet, but for the first time, she wanted to try. And perhaps that was enough. To begin, the following days unfolded with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope for Sarah. The announcement Benjamin made during the event had spread beyond the walls of the community center, quietly resonating throughout the city's network of shelters and aid organizations. Sarah, however, found herself in an emotional whirlwind. While Emma adapted with the ease only children possess, laughing more, sleeping peacefully, and trusting that the adults around her would keep her safe, Sarah remained trapped between gratitude and fear. Every act of kindness from Benjamin felt both genuine and too good to be true. How could someone like him, a man of power and wealth, be different from the countless others who had walked past her without a second glance? Benjamin, true to his word, did not pressure her. He visited the shelter again, never forcing, always offering. He observed as Sarah slowly began to engage more with the other mothers, participating in small activities, even if her guard remained visibly high. Emma's joy, however, was impossible to contain. She clung to every new experience like a treasure, embracing the kindness of volunteers, playing with other children, and even sketching small pictures of the event to show Benjamin during his visits. One morning, as Sarah sipped weak coffee in the shelter's small kitchen, the shelter coordinator approached her with quiet excitement. "You've been scheduled for an interview," she said. "It's part of the program Benjamin mentioned." Sarah's stomach tightened. The thought of returning to formal work after so long, of sitting in front of someone with the power to accept or deny her future, terrified her. Benjamin had anticipated this. That evening, he sat with Sarah on a worn-out bench in the shelter's courtyard, where a thin layer of snow had softened the hard edges of the city. Emma played in the snow nearby, giggling as she built a tiny snowman. "I know you're scared," Benjamin said plainly, "but you don't have to be." He explained that the program wasn't designed to trap her. There would be no catch, no hidden conditions. "This isn't about testing you. It's about giving you back a choice, something the world stole from you." Sarah remained silent, her eyes fixed on Emma. "What if I fail?" she finally asked. Benjamin's response came without hesitation. "Then we'll try again." Sarah's defenses cracked further. She knew failure all too well, but no one had ever said they'd simply try again without attaching blame or shame. The day of the interview arrived. Sarah sat nervously in a small office inside one of Benjamin's community centers. Across from her sat a woman from Benjamin's foundation, kind-eyed and patient. The questions were simple, designed less to evaluate and more to understand. Sarah spoke honestly about her previous work, her struggles, and, most importantly, her desire to provide for Emma. When the interview ended, the woman stood and shook Sarah's hand firmly. "We'll see you Monday," she said. Sarah was stunned. There had been no competition, no rejection, just a door quietly opening. When she returned to the shelter, Emma ran into her arms, sensing the change even without words. That evening, as they shared a simple dinner at the shelter, Emma whispered, "Mommy, does this mean we won't be cold anymore?" Sarah's throat tightened. For the first time, she could answer without lying. "No, baby, we won't." But it wasn't until the next morning that the true impact of Benjamin's involvement became undeniable. A video, captured during the supermarket incident by a customer who had witnessed the entire scene, surfaced online. It showed not just the confrontation, but Benjamin's intervention, his words echoing clearly. "This is not charity. This is humanity." The video spread rapidly, igniting discussions across social media, local news, and community forums. People who had never cared to notice the invisible mothers and children in the streets were suddenly confronted with the raw reality of Sarah's experience. The public's response was overwhelming. Donations poured into Benjamin's foundation, local businesses offered to support the new program, and volunteers signed up in record numbers. Sarah's story, though unnamed in the video, became the catalyst for a city-wide reflection on poverty, dignity, and compassion. At the shelter, Sarah watched the news report with Emma on her lap. She recognized herself instantly, but was surprised to see Benjamin portrayed not as a savior, but as someone who simply did what others had failed to do: acknowledge humanity. When Benjamin visited later that evening, the shelter buzzed with quiet excitement. Residents whispered about the video, grateful for the sudden wave of attention that might bring lasting change. Benjamin approached Sarah gently. "I didn't intend for this to go public," he confessed. "But if it helps others, I can live with it." Sarah nodded. For the first time, she saw Benjamin not as the distant figure from the supermarket, but as someone who understood, perhaps more deeply than she realized, the delicate line between help and spectacle. The next days were filled with preparation. Sarah was introduced to her new workplace, a small community office dedicated to coordinating aid for families like hers. It wasn't just a job, it was meaningful work, a chance to help others who walked the same difficult paths. She met colleagues, received training, and slowly began to believe that this wasn't temporary. Emma, in turn, began attending a nearby community preschool sponsored by the program. Each morning, mother and daughter walked together through the snow, Sarah carrying the weight of a past she couldn't yet fully let go, but also holding the fragile, growing belief that maybe, just maybe, they had found a beginning. Benjamin, watching all this unfold, knew that something inside Sarah had changed. She still moved carefully, still questioned every step, but she no longer refused to step forward. The city too began to change. Inspired by Sarah's story, albeit anonymously, other organizations began expanding their efforts. Conversations about homelessness shifted from blame to responsibility. The ripple effect of one small act of humanity was visible in every warm coat handed out, in every shelter, filled with more than just beds but dignity. And yet, Benjamin knew the real change was yet to come, because Sarah was only beginning to rediscover something that poverty had tried so hard to steal: hope. Winter began to fade slowly, giving way to the hesitant bloom of spring. The snow that once buried the streets of Chicago melted into streams along the sidewalks, leaving behind not only the remnants of a harsh season, but also signs of change. For Sarah and Emma, life had shifted in ways that neither of them fully understood. Yet the shelter, which once felt like a fragile refuge, became a stepping stone. Sarah's days were now filled with purpose, structure, and most importantly, a growing sense of belonging. Each morning, Sarah woke early, preparing Emma for her day at the community preschool before walking to her own job. The community office, where she worked, was small but vibrant, staffed by people who, like her, carried their own stories of resilience. The work wasn't glamorous, answering calls, helping organize donations, coordinating assistance for families, but it was real, and it mattered. For the first time in years, Sarah no longer felt invisible. The transformation wasn't immediate. Sarah still struggled with doubts, waking some nights gripped by panic, haunted by memories of cold benches and Emma's shivering figure clinging to her side. Yet, day after day, those fears softened. The routine, the people, and the visible impact of her work anchored her, making it harder for despair to seep back in. Emma blossomed even faster. Surrounded by other children, caring teachers, and a safe environment, she rediscovered parts of herself that the streets had nearly stolen. She laughed without fear, played without constantly looking over her shoulder, and returned home each evening with drawings and stories of new friendships. Sarah watched with a bittersweet heart, knowing how close she had come to losing this version of her daughter forever. Benjamin remained present, but never intrusive. He visited the office periodically, checking on the progress of the programs, speaking with staff, and always finding a moment to quietly greet Sarah and Emma. He never brought attention to himself or sought gratitude. Instead, he blended into the community he was helping to foster, leaving space for others to shine. It was during one of these visits that Sarah, for the first time, invited Benjamin to sit and share a coffee with her during lunch. It was a simple gesture, but Benjamin recognized its significance. As they sat by the window, watching the city move in slow rhythms, Sarah spoke openly, without the sharpness or hesitation that had marked their earlier conversations. "I didn't think I'd make it this far," she confessed, her eyes fixed on the streets below. "Not after everything. I thought this was just temporary, that eventually it would all go away, like everything else." Benjamin sipped his coffee, listening intently. "But it hasn't," she continued. "Emma's happy. I'm learning to be." She turned to him, eyes searching for something, confirmation, perhaps, or understanding. "Why me? Why did you stop that day?" Benjamin thought carefully before answering. "Because someone stopped for me once," he said. "Not in the way I did for you, but enough to remind me that no one deserves to be left behind. I promised myself that when I could, I'd do the same for someone else." Sarah nodded, absorbing the simplicity of his explanation. There were no grand designs, no hidden motivations, just a promise made by a man who had once known what it was like to feel forgotten. The city, too, showed signs of the transformations sparked by that quiet promise. Benjamin's initiative had expanded faster than anyone anticipated. Other business leaders, moved by the viral video and the subsequent public attention, contributed resources, funding, and their own time. New shelters were being improved, employment programs strengthened, and families who once faced the cold nights alone were now finding doors opening where there had previously been only walls. Sarah's work placed her directly in the heart of this change. She saw firsthand the mothers who arrived at the shelter, as she once did, exhausted, broken, but fiercely protective of their children. She greeted them not as a savior, but as someone who knew. She became the bridge between desperation and hope, helping them navigate a system that had once seemed designed to fail them. The more she worked, the more Sarah discovered pieces of herself she thought were lost. She remembered her love for organizing, for connecting people, for making things work when resources were scarce. Those old skills returned naturally, but now with purpose and recognition. Her colleagues trusted her judgment, leaned on her experience, and celebrated her victories. One evening, after a particularly challenging but rewarding day, Sarah stood outside the community center, watching Emma play with other children under the fading spring sunlight. Benjamin joined her quietly. "You did this," he said softly, motioning towards Emma and the growing group of families finding support. Sarah shook her head. "You did." Benjamin disagreed with a small but certain nod. "No, I just opened a door. You chose to walk through it." Sarah didn't argue. She knew he was right. The opportunity had been offered, but the choice had been hers. Every hard decision, every painful step forward had been her own. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting the city in a warm orange glow, Sarah felt a rare sense of peace. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending that the scars didn't exist. It was about recognizing that for the first time in a long while, the future wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Emma ran towards her, wrapping tiny arms around her waist. Sarah lifted her, holding her close as the child giggled. She looked at Benjamin and for the first time smiled without reservation. They were no longer just surviving, they were living. Months passed, and what began as a fragile opportunity evolved into a new life. Sarah and Emma, once shadows wandering the harsh streets of Chicago, now found themselves part of a vibrant and supportive community. The small apartment provided through Benjamin's program wasn't grand, but it was theirs. The first night, they slept there. Sarah lay awake for hours listening to Emma's peaceful breathing, overwhelmed by the simple but profound reality that they were safe. Emma thrived in ways Sarah had barely dared to imagine. School became a source of joy, not fear. She made friends easily, often filling the apartment with laughter as she told her mother about her day. Sarah herself adapted to her new role with remarkable grace, quickly becoming a respected member of the community center's staff. She wasn't just working, she was leading, organizing workshops, mentoring new arrivals, and building bridges with other local organizations. Benjamin remained a consistent presence, though he never overstepped. He attended events quietly, supported initiatives, and remained available whenever Sarah or the team needed him. He never allowed his role to turn into a spectacle. To him, the real story was in the day-to-day victories. The mother who found a job, the child who laughed for the first time in months, the family who no longer feared the cold night. But Sarah's story was about more than just survival. Over time, the relationship between her and Benjamin deepened, not romantically but profoundly. There was an unspoken bond forged through mutual respect and a shared understanding of loss and resilience. Their conversations became less formal and more genuine, often marked by quiet reflections on the choices that had brought them here. The video from the supermarket continued to circulate, becoming a quiet symbol of change in the city. It sparked conversations not just about charity, but about dignity, about recognizing the humanity in those society often ignored. Sarah, though initially hesitant about her story being public, accepted it for what it had accomplished. She saw the change in the faces of the mothers who came to the center, the cautious hope that hadn't existed before. One chilly spring evening, the community organized a small celebration to mark 6 months since the program's official launch. Families gathered in the center's modest hall, decorated with handmade banners and flowers. Children played, adults shared food and stories, and the air buzzed with genuine warmth. During the event, Sarah was asked to speak. She stood nervously at the front, clutching Emma's hand. Looking around the room, she saw reflections of herself in so many faces, the fear, the pride, the hope. She cleared her throat, struggling to find the words. "I don't know how to make speeches," she admitted, earning a few soft chuckles. "But I do know what it's like to believe you've run out of chances. I know what it feels like to wake up every day fighting just to make it to the next. I know the shame, the fear, the loneliness." Her voice trembled. Emma squeezed her hand tighter. "But I also know now what it feels like to be seen, to be helped without being judged, and to be given a chance to rebuild." Tears welled up in the eyes of many present, including Benjamin, who stood quietly in the back. "This place, this program saved me and my daughter," Sarah continued, "but it also gave me something even more important than safety. It gave me back my dignity." She paused, glancing down at Emma. "And it gave my daughter the chance to be a child again." Applause erupted, filling the room with an energy that Sarah could hardly bear without tears. For the first time, the weight she had carried alone was shared, carried by a community that now stood with her. After the event, as the room began to empty, Sarah found herself standing outside under the night sky. Snowflakes drifted lazily from above, settling softly on the city that once felt so unforgiving. Benjamin joined her, standing silently at her side. "You were right," Sarah said without looking at him. "Survival isn't living." Benjamin nodded, keeping his gaze on the snow. "It never was." Sarah turned to him. "Thank you." He shook his head. "No need." But Sarah insisted, "Not just for what you did that day, but for not walking away after." Benjamin's eyes softened. "I couldn't. You reminded me why I started this in the first place." As they stood there, watching the snow cover the familiar streets, Sarah realized that the city hadn't changed overnight, but in the faces of the families who now walked through its streets with renewed hope, it had started to heal. Weeks later, the community center received a special recognition from the city. The video, now part of a larger documentary on homelessness and resilience, was shown at the ceremony. Sarah was invited to speak once again, but this time she wasn't. Nervous, she spoke as someone who had walked through fire and found herself on the other side, stronger and unbroken. Sarah and Emma's story became more than a viral moment. It became a testament to what compassion, patience, and dignity could achieve. Benjamin too found himself transformed, not by the recognition, but by the simple truth that helping others wasn't about charity, it was about justice. And though Sarah knew life would never be perfect, she also knew that as long as she and Emma faced it together, they would never be truly alone again. As the city moved on, touched quietly by their story, Sarah embraced the new reality she had fought so hard to find. Not just safety, but a life worth living,